Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me as he does on every Training Friday, which happens every other Friday, is Tom Walls of the Firearms Academy of Seattle. Tom, thanks for coming along on the ride today, man.
Good to see you again, Paul.
Uh, we need to start today on a little bit of a somber note. We got word this morning that one of the good ones in the firearms training world has passed. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I do. Word came down on my feeds early this morning at approximately 2:30 hours this morning. Ed Head, a longtime gun sight instructor, uh, Air Force veteran, Border Patrol veteran, legend, writer, um, hell of a nice guy, passed away from cancer this morning quietly with his family. And with your permission, I'd like to read verbatim a much better statement than I could ever make from Ken Campbell, the CEO of Gunsight. I only knew Ed well enough to say, "Hi, Ed," at SHOT Show, and he'd go, "Tom, right?" Trained with him, but Diane and I were fortunate enough to spend a week with him training just recently, last year. So this was out on Facebook from Ken Campbell, the CEO of Gunsight Academy, and I quote from him: "With a heavy heart, we are saddened to report the passing of our coworker, Gunsight Rangemaster and old friend Ed Head. Ed came to us several weeks ago, sharing that his doctors had found health issues and later was found to have inoperable cancer. He asked not to share this at that time. Friends, church family, and Gunsight family rallied around Ed and Jean these last several weeks, assisting in every way possible. He passed comfortably at home, surrounded by Jean and close friends. Ed was a U.S. Air Force security police officer from 1972 to 1976, specializing in nuclear weapons security. Also, he was captain of a weapons and tactics competition team. He entered the U.S. Border Patrol in August 1977 and was assigned to San Diego, California. During his tenure, he supervised a patrol group of 19 supervisors and 160 agents at the Imperial Beach Border Patrol Station. His stories of his time there are near legendary. Successfully completing the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center Firearms Instructor Training Program with a distinguished master rating, he began working as a range officer, conducting all firearms trainings and qualifications for the Chula Vista and Imperial Beach Border Patrol Station. That later morphed into the sector firearms instructor and then senior firearms instructor for the San Diego Border Patrol sector, including more than 2,500 agents. Additionally, he was the founder, range master, and first club champion of the San Diego Law Enforcement Combat Shooters Association. Ed retired after 24 years with the U.S. Border Patrol, retiring in 2001. Ed met the love of his life, Jean, and they were married over 36 years. They shared many adventures from horses to recent travel in their RV. The other great love of his life was Gunsight. He began attending Gunsight in 1988, earning the coveted expert, the Golden E ticket, rating in many of his classes. He attained instructor rating at Gunsight in 1992. Ed worked as operations manager from February of 2005 to September 2010, then resumed his lengthy teaching career at Gunsight. His career as a writer in the gun industry also began to flourish, writing for NRA publications and working with Michael Bain on video production. Ed taught his last class at Gunsight late May of 2022. We know it was a very difficult moment for him to come to us in early June to let us know of his illness and withdrawing from active instructor. We assured him he was only being moved to the injured reserve list, and we look forward to his return. A memorial service will be held by the Bible Church, the Canyon Bible Church, led by Gunsight alumni pastor John Filkey, I believe, on a date to be determined at the Gunsight Classroom at Paulden. Please keep Gene and friends and family in your prayers. With great respect, Ken Campbell, Sheriff Retired, Chief Executive Officer, Gunsight Academy. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are diminished.
We are. I never met Ed. He's a name, if you are involved in the training community, he's a name you hear a lot. He's greatly respected by people who are greatly respected. And it's a huge loss for the training community. We do have, and as they say in show business, and I hate to put it as show business, but the show must go on. We do need to talk about. We do have a topic we need to talk about, and this one I do think is an interesting one. Tom, you proposed it the other day, and I thought this is there's been a bit of a discussion on this, which I think is healthy.
I would agree. Yeah, not talking about it is the problem.
Yes. I'm going to start personally by giving my personal story. When my journey with firearms started at about, yay tall. As a very young man, I started with pellet guns and BB guns, and then at about the age, I suppose, of 8 or 9, I got into my dad allowed me to get into 22s once he was absolutely sure I was okay. But it was always rifle. I didn't get into handgun until adulthood. And specifically, I didn't get into handgun for self-defense until there was this little podcast that came out called Politics and Guns by this old, bald, fat trucker.
Hey.
Who's also on the air now. So,
okay.
Anyway, speaking, of course, of me, it took me quite a while before I was comfortable enough to carry with a round in the chamber. There are people that call that Israeli carry. And I've heard pros and cons on Israeli carry. Personally, since I took my first professional instruction class in defensive handgun, which was taught by, excuse me, I've got something going on with my voice today, which was taught by a quartered cat, Kathy Jackson. I proudly still wear her hat from time to time. Since that class, every day I carry, which is every day, I carry with a round in the chamber. It's been many years now, and I've had absolutely zero incidents. A lot of that is because of practice and not manipulating the gun more than I absolutely have to. But let's get into carrying with a round in the chamber. Are there reasons not to carry with a round in the chamber?
Actually, they are. If I can, let me give you a little backstory on what was going on here. What I will not do is mention the names of the two gentlemen involved on the Facebook argument, because that's pointless. I know I met one of them. One of them is a very well-known fantasy author, a very talented one, and has some serious credentials as a gun dude, which is one of the reasons I read his stuff.
And I've had the other one on the air several times.
Okay, a violence dynamics expert.
Yes.
The reason that this came up, and it was the kerfuffle of the week on those Facebook threads last week, is that the violence dynamics expert made a statement on social media that really you shouldn't carry with a round in the chamber because it's bad. He went on to articulate those reasons, and I know the guy personally. I've worked with him. I've trained with him. His phone number's in my contact list. And he and I were discussing some of the stuff. The author disagreed with the premise and The author's fans immediately started dogpiling on the violence dynamic expert on social media. The whole problem with that, whichever side you fall on, was that the discussion of the reasons as to why you might carry with an empty chamber went away. Diane and I will be teaching a concealed carry class this weekend. And one of the things we talk about is carrying on an empty chamber or not. And those folks that will walk into class with a gun with a magazine inserted in an empty chamber invariably do so out of respect for the gun and understanding that their level of training is not very high. So it comes down to training, which is why I suggested it for Training Friday. Now, to get back to your question, are there reasons not to? There's a bunch of reasons not to, most of them historical. And most of the people that carry on an empty chamber will make an appeal to authority. Well, the Israelis carry that way and they're, a bunch of badass warriors. Not disagreeing when you've got a country surrounded by people whose stated object is to exterminate you, you have some serious military. Starting with Israeli carry, the reason that they carry with an empty chamber is because they get very little firearms training, especially with handguns in particular. And they don't want people handling that stuff. Remember, when you're in the military, you pretty much know when you're going to go out and have risk of contact with the enemy. When you're behind the wire, when you're in the base or a training situation, they can make it really, really safe and have your gun cleared, have it in condition 3. So saying that we should carry that way just because they do without knowing the reason why really is irresponsible. If you're going to understand your firearm, I frequently will ask students, what condition is your gun in right now? So they're constantly aware of it. That's one of the reasons, and that's the one we hear most commonly, but there are others, and there are historic ones.
If I could, let me get a comment in, because I think this is where we're going anyway. Let me get Larry's comment. At first, you should discuss types of firearms. And I think where Larry's going with this is, let's go back to the 1950s, 1960s, before semi-automatic firearms became popular for carrying. With revolvers, it is quite common to make sure that the cylinder that is under the hammer is empty for a dropped gun situation. And I may be talking out my backside on that one. I've never carried a revolver on a daily basis. I just know that from my youth, I was told if you carry a revolver, you make sure the cylinder, the empty chamber in the cylinder, the head, I can't even talk right now, that when you put the cylinder in, that it goes in with an empty one under the hammer. That's what I remember from my youth.
Exactly right. And that's exactly where we're going to with that comment. Thank you. Let's take it back a little further. Let's go back to Roy Rogers and the single action army revolver that we all know. At that time, the accepted method of carrying a single action revolver was, even though it carried 6, because it was a 6-shooter, was to carry 5, called it 5 beans in the wheel. And sometimes they'd take a $1 bill or a 5 or whatever the appropriate denomination was and roll it up and stick it in that empty chamber, because with the mechanical design of revolvers of that time, the firing pin was the end of the hammer. If you look at those old things, you have a spiky hammer, which is the firing pin. And when the hammer was down, it was resting on the primer. You can imagine that that's not a particularly safe situation should the firearm be dropped or hit from behind or whatever. So that was the method of carry at that time. 5 beans in the wheel, carry it on an empty. As you cock the hammer, it rotated the cylinder, whichever direction that gun did, to come up with a live cartridge.
Yep.
That was the beginning of that in American history. The other thing is, even with modern firearms, and modern revolvers now have transfer bars, and you really it's damn near impossible to have the thing let off accidentally. That doesn't apply to all firearms. You may have heard of the term cruiser ready. We're talking about police firearms, long guns, the patrol rifle, the AR-15, or any of the shotguns. Cruiser ready means that you may have a magazine full, a tubular magazine in a shotgun, box magazine in a patrol rifle, but the bolt is down and the chamber is empty. If you were to carry one of those types of firearms with a loaded chamber, even if it's not cocked or whatever needs to be done to that particular firearm, it is not unknown that if the vehicle's in a collision, the firearm will go off, because those types of firearms do not have the mechanical devices incorporated and designed into them to prevent the hammer from falling when it's not supposed to fall.
Right.
Handguns do. Modern handguns do. They're required to. There's some type of a blocking mechanism or multiple blocking mechanisms that will keep that from happening.
With the exception if you have a Sig Sauer and take a bat to it at one particular model. But yeah.
That a few years ago. Yeah. It's fairly well known. I'm a 1911 fan. I've got a 2011 on my hip right now, and it's cocked and locked, which means that I've got a full magazine, round in the chamber, hammer's back, manual safety's on.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a bunch of other safeties incorporated in that gun that are passive, but I'm perfectly comfortable carrying it. However, if you're not familiar with firearms to know the mechanics of how they worked, I, as a cop, would frequently have people, "Oh, excuse me, officer, your gun's cocked?" I'm going, "Yes, thank you very much." It comes back to training, not knowing, or your education being on the left side of the Dunning-Kruger curve. Yeah, I watched every episode of Maverick, so I know all about pistols. So cruiser ready, yeah. And again, you usually have a pretty good idea when you're going to come up against something where you may need to use that firearm, and you will have time to chamber around. Defensive handgunning, we don't always know that. I can think of an example, and we've talked about this one before because it's local to us. In Tumwater, Washington, which is not too far from the capital of Olympia, there is a Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere else? Anyway, several summers ago, a gentleman was committing murders and carjackings and stuff with a firearm. He goes into the Walmart, uses his remaining rounds in his little J-frame to shoot through the glass case to get more ammo for his little J-frame revolver, leaves the store, and proceeds to shoot other people in the parking lot. Long story short, a good guy with a gun was able to stop him. If you look, however, at the security video, you will notice in the background there is a second good guy with a gun by the main doors trying to rack a round into his empty chamber. Under stress, he short shucks it, and that gun is useless for the duration of the actual conflict.
Except as a club. Yeah, you don't want to club somebody as they're actively shooting other people.
So this is something that happens real world. We talk about how can you rack one in the chamber if you've got an armful of kid or groceries or something else. I spent 6 months with my arm in a sling when I had surgery. I didn't have that other hand to rack the gun, to get one in the chamber. On the other hand, if you're not real comfortable with it, you may not know. It comes down to training, and that's where this whole internet kerfuffle thing kind of fell apart, was they started, and to be honest, it was neither of the two gentlemen involved were yelling. It was the fandom that was yelling, because it's the internet and you can do that anonymously and gain points in whatever fashion. It comes down to what is your level of comfort with it?
I'm going to say this: if you are a new person, and I'm going to say new, somewhere between you got your gun today and you've had your gun for 35 years and yet to take your first professional firearms course, and you are comfortable enough to carry the gun with a magazine, with a fully loaded magazine in the gun, but not one in the pipe, not one in the chamber, I'm going to say okay, but keep your eyes wide super open. Really pay attention and understand you're adding to that gonna be slow draw stroke. You're adding another second to a second and a half to your response time for that.
Well, you're a professional driver. You know how uncomfortable seat belts are. I'll just put it on
Yes.
before the accident. And it's kind of a flippant argument to be truthful about it. When somebody tells me, "Well, I'm not carrying one in the chamber," my first instinct is to bat them on the head and say, "You don't have a loaded gun." On the other hand, they made the decision to carry. They're just not all the way there. And really, the onus is on me, if they're in my class as an instructor and a trainer, to get them to the point where they know what's going on. One of the arguments that came up in kerfuffle was, well, if we practice drawing quickly from the holster and there's a bang at the end, that's what we're training to do. It's a reflex, man, and that reflex is dangerous. And again, that argument was not listened to by some of the commenters on the threads. That comes back, Paul, comes back to training.
Yes.
I mean, how many of us that are serious about our training will dry fire on a timer? I make a conscious decision to press the trigger. I have done it for real. When I worked as a reserve police officer, my gun came out more than once. I did not automatically shoot under stress because I'd had the training, and I was confident because I had seen myself do this before. I can't emphasize this enough. People will go to a concealed carry class, like they'll come to our class on Sunday. Our state does not require training for a carry permit. Some states do. Personally, I would rather see it as an incentive than as a requirement, but in those states where it's required, the stories I'm hearing from my fellow instructors around the country is that a lot of people take the attitude, well, if this training is good enough for the state of whatever, then it must be enough to make me a really good, safe, well-trained firearms carrier. And yeah, I'm not, no. It's usually minimal. Law enforcement in this state, just to carry a handgun, is a minimum of 40 hours training in the academy. I think civilians can be trained to that over a period of time successfly, and maybe even a little better.
Let me get a couple comments in here because we've got two really good comments I want to get to. Get the first one up here. Larry over on the Facebook side says, "What about the slam fire problem with old MDL-12s?" That's kind of a new one. Does that mean anything to you, Tom?
I'm having trouble placing the Model 12s. That's more likely my ignorance than his tapping. Slam fire, though, the idea that when you are dropping a slide on a full chamber, that the gun slam fires, something makes the gun go bang, not pulling the trigger. That is anytime that happens, that's a mechanical issue. If it's a known issue with your gun, why are you carrying that gun? There are more. There's so many choices now of good handguns. We're truly in a golden age. And again, I think we're going to see more and more variety in the smaller 10-round and less capacity guns coming out as these states do their foolishness.
Yeah, he followed up with the Winchester Model 12 is what he followed up with just now. That just came in.
Yeah.
And then I want to get to another comment here. Gun websites on the YouTube side. Are there numbers to indicate how many people have died or been seriously injured because they were shot while carrying with an empty chamber, or is this all theoretical? I don't know that there are any hard numbers on this.
I would be interested in seeing that. That would be interesting. I think it would be a challenge for a researcher because you would have to do it retrospectively. And that is data that would have to have been recorded and searchable. But again, I give you the one story of the shooting. Masada, you brought it up in American Handgunner a few years ago. If you Google Tumwater, Washington shooting, American Handgunner, you can find the story, and that is a real world case. I happen to know the good guy shooter that prevailed.
He was a student at Firearms Academy of Seattle.
a
I
student
don't
of
think
mine.
I don't think I'm giving
And
away
other
too much
instructors as well.
information.
No, it was like, again, he was written in a public forum. And he came back later and did some training with us, both with Masada Ayub later on and at FAS, and brought his family to train too, which I found very flattering. But yeah, that does happen. Remember, there are a lot of defensive handgun uses. I saw another article today. They typically will say between 500,000 and 1.5 million times a year. The reason we don't have a hard number for that doesn't get reported.
Yeah,
Doesn't get reported. So
exactly
just
right.
because the number is not there doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's really hard to do that kind of research.
Well, is it a defensive gun use if the gun's never drawn? If you just go to your hip, is that a defensive gun use?
I think it
Yeah.
is, and in most instances, at least anecdotally, in most instances, that's what's happened. The gun's never drawn, or
Yeah.
certainly never fired. So you don't see it on TV because nothing happened. They're not going to spend airtime with nothing happened. It doesn't make an interesting situation. Now, if you read the NRA publications with the Armed Citizen column, occasionally you'll see some of these reports on local news, but you won't see it on national hardly at all. Again, it's what level of preparedness are you ready for? Am I going to meet some standard? What are my standards? What's my level of comfort? What's my acceptable level of risk? If someone threatens my life, certainly my wife's life, and if she doesn't take care of the problem, it's kind of my job to back her up.
Yeah.
I want everything ready to go. I know, because I have done it countless times, that I can draw a loaded gun and not take off the safety unless I know I have a reason. I can do this consciously. One of the things that we teach at the Firearms Academy of Seattle, and we're not unique, but we put it into words, we're not just teaching shooting, we're teaching you to think with a gun in your hand. Certainly Gunsight Academy excels at that, and a number of excellent schools and trainers around the country excel at that. It's not just the mechanics of bang. I can teach a monkey how to make a gun go bang. Hunting dogs in the boat have made shotguns go bang.
Yes. Leaning your shotgun against a barbed wire fence incorrectly and it goes over can make a shotgun go bang.
I worked for a gentleman who had that happen. He was a one-legged gentleman by the time I met him.
I used to have a dispatcher who is no longer with us. That's exactly what happened to him. Only it wasn't his leg that got caught. It was a bounce.
So we often see this in the training world. We see the questionnaires in the beginning. Well, I know how to shoot. Okay. The question is, what does know how to shoot mean? And it comes back to training. So when we get the lady or the gentleman that shows up and they've decided they're going to carry, and for some people, that's a major freaking decision. That may be a complete paradigm change from the way they've been raised and voted and believed and preached and talked in public. And I respect that. They come to us having made the decision. It's not up to us to make fun of them. I might chide them a little bit, but I won't do it maliciously. But we need to train them and find out what their reasoning is. What concerns you? Let's talk about that.
Get a couple. We're getting lots of comments, and let me get a couple, 3 of them in. Going back 5 minutes now. Pete says, I know there are 0 issues carrying with a loaded chamber, so the idea is it's more safe to carry unloaded is fantasy, in my opinion. I'm going to go kind of with Tom on this. It's more, that's a training issue. You've got to make the person believe that it is absolutely safe to carry with one in the chamber. You've got to...
Well, not just believe, but understand.
Yes.
Belief can be appeal to authority. Oh, so-and-so that I worship on YouTube says it's okay, and he knows more than I do. But to understand it, once someone owns it, we do a thing that our director calls discovery-based learning. Sometimes we'll let them do something wrong. Here's the wrong way to do this. Try it in a safe condition that we'll establish and understand why. And they go, oh. People need to understand why. And Americans are very much into, oh, yeah, prove it. Tell me. Show me. We tell them to do a certain thing. Part of what we teach in the concealed carry class is a marksmanship thing. I'll prove it to them by singing out loud to make it an amusing lesson, but to also prove the point. Once people understand the mechanics of the gun, the dynamics of the technique that they're doing, they go, oh, okay, now I own it.
Well, one test, if you're debating whether you're going to carry with one in the chamber, get some professional training, please, please, please.
Please.
One thing I will say is, if you're worried about it, go ahead and carry with the chamber empty. However, before you load the magazine in, rack the chamber, make it so you're ready to dry fire, then load the magazine, carry all day. Unload take the magazine out at the end of the day, point the firearm, go to your dry fire area, point the firearm in a safe direction, and test to see if that trigger has been activated. I will just about guarantee you it hasn't been. I've been carrying with one in the chamber for many, many, many years now, and never has for me. So, get another one, another comment in here. Pete again says, if anyone were to be injured in a shootout because they carried unloaded, they would be all over the news and used as an example for years if it happened. No?
Injured in a shootout because they carried unloaded.
I think it's.
There are news services that certainly would. Oh yes, a good guy with a gun, haha, is a myth. I don't know that that's really the issue that I'm talking so much about. I know that people carry with an empty chamber. That's an indisputable fact. Some people do. My job as an instructor, any instructor's job, is to teach someone how to efficiently and effectively use that firearm to protect innocent life. It is much more effective and efficient if you've got the damn thing loaded.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, and then as I said earlier in this show, you've already got a second, and if you've not practiced, a 1 second draw is an amazingly fast draw. Something I don't know that I can get to.
Well, a 1 second draw and a hit,
yeah,
is an entirely different thing.
But you're racking a slide and then coming up into sight picture. You're adding another second to a second and a half.
It's not so much the time. There is some data out there that I have seen that suggests that a speed draw is not really that often a critical thing in self-defense. It's nice to have a smooth draw. It would be terrible to fumble the thing under stress, and that's the key thing, is under stress. You will default to your lowest level of training. So getting a sub 1 second draw is wonderful for competition, but in reality, it doesn't turn out to be that big a deal. If you have to add the other thing, oh, and I need to rack it, however, that adds a more complex motion, even if you practice it. That does add some significant time. And if I was a bad guy and some dude pulls his gun on me and then has to rack it, what message does that send me?
They're not prepared.
Well, rack the shotgun. What you just said was, you don't really want to shoot. You're just doing it. Bad guys. Got good news flash for you. Bad guys are used to having guns pointed at them. Okay?
Larry Benson has a quote from Bill Jordan. Take your time quickly. I love that.
Excellent quote.
Tom, we got to get out of here. We've got Women for Gun Rights coming up very soon on the channel. Before we get out of here, man, and I ask you this every time you're on, anything open up at the Firearms Academy of Seattle? Anything people should be interested in that you want to let them know about?
I do indeed, and I actually queued it up this time. We're well into September now. However, the first weekend in October, we have your favorite class. We have our active shooter interdiction class. That's a 2-day class, which does some serious shooting at distance, close up. There's some scenarios we'll play through, some role play, that sort of thing. We have our usual medley of classes, from introduction, like the bullet comes out the hole in the end, to our tactical rifle, our close quarter carbine. We have Tim Herron coming on the 22nd and 23rd to do some practical shooting. We are full into our fall schedule and moving briskly forward.
Very cool. Is part of the active shooter interdiction, is part of that shooting a moving target while you yourself are moving, or was that just because mine was an expanded one?
We have the ability to have mechanically moving targets. We have an electric power system that does that.
Yeah.
So
that is the single most difficult thing I've ever done. Shooting a moving target while I am moving. I've done it. It can be done, but holy cow.
If I could put in one more plug.
Yep.
For those of you that have access to the publication Shooting Industry, the just recently out September 2022 issue, page 26, is featured a lady that owns a shooting range, and as far as I know, she's the only one in the country as a sole proprietor and not Mrs. Somebody. And I work for her. Her name is Belle McCormick, and we are damn proud.
She is a fantastic individual. She used to be a co-host on Polite Society podcast. I am honored to know her. I'm honored to have worked with her in the past. I look forward to working with her again in the future. Tom, we got to get out of here because I got to turn the channel over. But
you got to go. You got people to take care of, Paul.
Yeah, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you in 4 weeks, because in 2 weeks we're going to be doing AmCon. So thanks again, man.
Safe travels, my friend. Best to the missus.
All right. And for viewers, come join us tomorrow, noon Central Time,